I have been at Lifeson for just over 4 years now. Looking back, one of the first sermons I preached on when I came here was on the book of Job. And in fact, in that sermon, we actually take on the task of covering the entire book of Job in one sermon, which is quite a task because there's a lot here. The other problem that I face with that sermon is usually if I was to do a teaching on an entire book, it would be a lot of summarizing, right? Instead of reading big portions of text, I would summarize the points that they were making and then move on to the next thing. However, the book of Job ends up being my favorite book of the Bible, at least the Old Testament, but it's pretty close to being my favorite. I absolutely love it. And so I would find that I would have sections where I couldn't bring myself to summarize it because the poeticness of it and the volume of what's being said is just so important to me. So I would end up reading it all. However, over the next few weeks, we're going to look into the book of Job and take little lessons from it and pull them out and just have a better understanding of that. So I would encourage you, if you haven't read the book of Job in the Old Testament, to sit down and read it. And if you haven't read it in one sitting, then that's something you should do as well. I find that when you do that with any portion of the Bible, just focus in and get rid of all the distractions and read it in one sitting, that you just soak it in a different way, and you can really see the stories of the Bible in a fresher light. At least I find when I read them that way. Today what I want to do is just talk about the book of Job and one of the lessons we can learn from it. And we'll have some questions arise probably as we look through the overview of the story. However, hold on to those because we're going to answer them in the coming weeks. The story of Job is said to be one of the oldest stories of the Bible, most likely recorded by Moses when they wandered in the wilderness. However, the verbal account of it would actually be much older than that. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy the story so much, is because it gives us this glimpse into early mankind and their relationship with God before all of the clutter came around in culture and clouded our lives. And so Job is this very interesting character, and what happens in the story is extremely interesting. And the questions of why would this happen, and what was God trying to teach and accomplish in this, and what can we learn from it. And so some overview of the story. In the story, we meet a man named Job. And Job, in his country and his area of the world, is the richest man in that land. He has the most crops, he has the most livestock, the most servants, and he has a very good family. He has a number of sons and daughters, and they're adults at this point. And they will often gather together and have feasts in one another's houses. And it says that the morning after they would have these meals, that Job would actually get up, and he would take an animal and he would go to the temple and he would offer a sacrifice just in case one of his children had sinned the night before. He's a very cautious man. He was very aware and careful about how he stood before God, because he wanted him and his family to be right with God, which is a very important thing. In fact, he was a very good man. He had all these servants, yet he treated them well. Later on, there's some conversation between Job and a number of his friends, and even in there, his friends say, like, you always helped people when they were in need, and you were always there to give counsel at the gates, which is this term they used for the wise people of the town who would give advice on things, and he was a good man. We also have this spiritual side of the thing, of the story at the start there, where the angels are going into heaven to give account to God on what they have seen and worked and done and encountered on earth. And it says that Satan is also there, and he's to give an account to God. That's really interesting on its own, but We'll skip over that. And he's there, and he's kind of having this bickering with God. And God says to him, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him. He's righteous. He's blameless. He loves me. He's a good man. And Satan's response to God is very simple. He says, Job only is that way because you've put this hedge around him. And that point I actually kind of get, right? Like, we can all agree with that to some degree, that it's easy to be happy and joyful and good and all of these things when life is well, when you have money in the bank and bills are being paid and your family's healthy and your friends are good and life is good and there's no real storms around you. And that's what Satan's saying, is that Job only loves you, God, because you've put this hedge around him. And God kind of takes Satan up on the unspoken offer, or he puts this offer out there to show Satan that that's not really the case. And he says to him basically, you can go and you can touch Job's life. Leave him alone. But you can touch his life and do whatever you want to his lifestyle. And watch, he will not curse me. It's a very interesting thing. Why would God allow that to happen? As we'll see, what does come next is quite painful. And that's one of the questions that we'll answer in the coming weeks of why would God allow this to happen? Anyways, we'll answer that another day. I'll try not to go into it today. But what happens next is Job is somewhere, and one of his servants comes running full speed to him, panting out of breath. He says, I was over in your field. And these people came and they lit it on fire, and they killed all of your servants, and they burned all of your crops, and only I escaped to come and tell you. It's a huge loss. Then, as that servant's finishing what he's saying, another servant comes running. I was off in this field, and all of your sheep were there, and these people came, and they killed them, and they took all your sheep, and they killed all the servants, and I alone came. And one by one, the servants who were across Job's land came to tell him the devastating news of all of his resources and property being pillaged and killed and burned and destroyed and taken. And in that moment, Job went from being a man of wealth to a man of poverty. Like that. But then another servant arrives. He says, your children, your sons and your daughters, they were gathered at one of their homes. They were having a meal inside. And a great wind blew through the land and knocked down the walls, and the roof caved in on them. And all of your children and all of your servants died, and I alone came to tell you. I can't even begin to imagine what that would be like. Not at all. I read that and I picture my children, and I can't at all understand the pain that Job is going through. Yet in that moment, he does not curse God. Next, we're back in the spiritual realm here, and Satan is once again before God, and God says, look, he didn't curse me. You took everything he had, and he still loves me. Satan's response is, well, we didn't push him far enough. He still has his health and his life, and so if he has that, then he won't curse you. And God's response, once again, is okay. You can go and touch his body, touch his health, do whatever you want to him. Spare his life, but do whatever you want to him, and watch, he will not curse me. And once again, that leads us to this question of, God, why are you allowing this to happen? You yourself said that Job is blameless, that he's a good man. Why would this happen to him? We'll answer that another day. Next, we find Job, and he's sitting on a pile of ashes, the remnants of one of his buildings, and he's disfigured and he's covered in sores, and he's itching and agitated, and he has a piece of broken pottery, and he's itching his wounds with that, trying to get some sense of relief, but he does not find it. His wife comes up to him, probably disgusted. And she says, why don't you just curse God and die? Then she's gone. That's the last we see of her. I don't know what happens to her, but she's gone. Some of Job's friends come to gather around him. Surely they've heard the news of what has happened. In fact, Job is in such a state of physical suffering and pain, and the sores are so severe that it says his friends actually did not recognize him at first. They recognized, however, the pain that he's in, the great agony, and that there's not really much they can say to him in this moment. And so they sit there for a number of days. I think it's something like a week that they sit there, or maybe not. That seems like a lot. But anyways, they sit there for a great number of days, saying nothing, just in their pain. And then they talk. And we get many, many, many chapters of a back and forth between Job and his friends saying stuff like, obviously there's sin in your life that you need to address. And Job says, no, there's not. I give sacrifices. I take care of that. I'm a good man. And they say that, don't you know that the rain falls on the good and the wicked? And likewise, bad days will come. And Job's like, but like this is ridiculous. And Job kind of gets to a point where he starts to blame God. And he says, if only I could stand before God and plead my case, then he would see that this doesn't add up, that there's something wrong here. Finally, one of Job's friends, the youngest of them, who's been silent because that was the culture of the day, he pipes up and he says, I held my tongue. And he says, but I no longer can. And he actually gives defense of God and God's glory and the Almighty. And we end this segment with Job just wanting to question God, wanting to call out to God and plead his case. And then God would see that Job is in the right, which puts God in the wrong. A bold statement, an arrogant statement, one that so many find themselves falling into. There's so many people throughout history and today, and some of you watching this video probably, who fall into that thinking of, I am in the right and God is in error. That's never a correct assumption. However, in this time, God actually speaks to Job, and it's so interesting what he says, how he says it, and why he says it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. God speaks to them starting in chapter 38. And what I'm going to do, instead of reading it all, because it's written in this poetic way that I personally really enjoy, but what I'm going to do is I've highlighted portions of it, and I'm just going to read those, and then we'll talk about the why. In chapter 38, he starts, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. He says, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. So you can picture this booming voice coming out of this whirlwind, and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. See, Job wanted to have this court appearance with God. And so God now is putting Job on the stand, and he's saying, you question me, but you don't have understanding. I will question you, and you see if you can respond to these questions. And listen to these questions as another human being and ask yourself, can I answer this? This is what God asks of Job. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched out the line upon it? Or who shut in the sea with its doors, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far you shall come, and no further, and here shall your proud waves be stayed? Have you commanded the morning since your days begun, and caused the dawn to know its place? Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the depths? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that a flood of water may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings that may go and say to you, here we are? Who provides for the raven its prey, and its young one cry out to God for help and wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spread its wings towards the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high? And that's maybe what? Like an eighth of the questions that God asks Job here. And it leaves, these questions of the natural order of things, of the creation account. And where were you? Do you understand why and how this all works? Have you set about the order of the chaos of the universe that the raven can find food, or that the wild ox would serve you? No, it would not. Of course not. You would never trust it. Do you understand why the waves stop here and they don't stop there? Can you say, lightning, go there, and it does? Have you ever commanded the sun to rise? Of course not. None of us have. And he asks all these questions that put Job in his place. However, his questioning is far from over. Job speaks, but before he does, it starts in chapter 40. It says, "And the Lord said to Job, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it." Job is trying to blame the fault on God, a fault finder. And God is saying, basically, what makes you think you can question me, the Almighty? I am up here. You are lowly down there. My ways are so much higher than your ways. Job responds. He says, "Then Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you?" He's speechless, and basically. "I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further." Job has come to an understanding that God is at a whole other level. I ask questions, but I cannot answer you. God actually is not done asking his questions. He continues. "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. Will you even put me in the wrong?" Think of that question. Will you put God in the wrong? Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? Have you an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with majesty and dignity, clothe yourself with glory and splendor. Pour out the overflowings of your anger and look upon everyone who is proud and abase him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low, and tread down on the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together. Bind their faces in the world below. Then will I also acknowledge to you that you in your own right can save you? He's saying, look at you and look at me. We are not in the same category. Do you have an arm like God? Can you reach and do what I can do? Is your voice as powerful as mine? Are you the judge? Can you say who is in the right and in the wrong? No, he cannot. Then we have this two sections of text where God talks about two creatures, and I butcher their names, the Behemoth and the Levanathan. Maybe I didn't butcher their names. The first one has this description that in some commentaries call it a hippopotamus, and I laugh at that. I think that's ridiculous. To me, it reads more like a dinosaur. But he's basically saying, look at this creature. For example, behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power is in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. Have you seen a hippo's tail? It is nothing like a cedar tree. His stones of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are bars of iron. He is the first of God's work. For the mountains yield food for him, where the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plant he lies, and in the shelter of the reeds his marsh He goes on a little bit more about it. But he's saying, look at how great this creature is. Then he stops. He talks quite a bit more about this other one, the Levanathan. Can you draw it out with a fish hook, or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make pleas to you? Will it listen to you? Can you put a leash on it and get your children to walk it like it's a pet? No. Can you fill its skin with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? Lay your hands on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. This is one of those creatures. Where he's saying, if you mess with it once, you will stay away from it if you live as long as you can, because you do not want to be near this thing. He's saying this creature is so strong and so powerful and so impressive and dangerous. He says that it's extremely proud. Then he talks about its defense abilities, and he says clubs are counted as stubble. He laughs at the rattling of javelins. So you throw a javelin at it, it does nothing. You beat it with a club, it does nothing. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads himself like the threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment behind him. He leaves a shining wake. One would think of the deep to be a white-haired. On earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. He sees everything that is high. He is the king over the sons of pride. I missed it somehow, but in this description it also talks about how he would breathe fire. And so we have a description of a dragon, which I always found neat. And basically what God is doing is he's talking about, first of all, God's greatness, his majesty, his power, his judgment. Then he talks about this dinosaur, or hippopotamus, but he talks about this dinosaur, and he says, look at how great this creature is. And then he talks about the Levanathan, his dragon, and he says, look at how great this creature is. You wouldn't dare walk up to it. And what's the point there? The point is this: you wouldn't go and stand before this dragon, but yet you think you can stand before me, the one who made the dragon. This really puts us and Job in our place. And Job has a response, one that we should cherish and learn from. In chapter 42, the last chapter of the book, then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Job comes to this understanding of the limitlessness of God, and that his plans are ultimate, that nothing will stand in their way. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? He's reiterating the question that God asked him at the start. Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you and make it known to me. And then Job actually finally answers God. And his answer is this: I have heard of you with the hearing of my ear. See, Job knew of God. He heard of God. He had an idea about God. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. He's saying, I had one understanding of you, and it was skewed, it was one way. But now I see you, and I am brought low. I understand. Your ways are higher than my ways. The Old Testament reiterates this idea of the wisdom of God surpassing the wisdom of man. In there it actually says that as far as the east is from the west, infinity, so is the ways of God higher than the ways of man. To lean not on your own understanding, but rather lean on the ways and wisdom of God. In your life, you'll find people who have a knowledge of expertise in one area. For example, when we were doing the renovations of the church basement, we had a lot of handymen there who knew what they were doing. And then we had me. And I don't know what I was doing. And so I listened to their instruction. I listened to their counsel because they knew what they were talking about. And yet so often people come before God like Job, and they think that they know best. They think that they know better. And God's response is, you have no knowledge. Like next to me, you have no knowledge. And so why are you thinking you can question me? Why are you thinking that your judgment can be better than mine? It cannot. We need to come to that place where we understand that God's wisdom, God's ways, and God's knowledge is so much greater than ours. It's one of the key lessons in the book of Job. There's a lot of questions you're left with after reading the book of Job. We'll talk about those in the coming weeks. But today I want to really bring home that point. Is as you go through problems in life, as you go through troubles and you start to question things and you start to wonder, and as you develop your understanding of right and wrong, let it not be what you decide is right and wrong, but rather turn to God and recognize that He is morally perfect. He is absolute in this area, and follow His ways in what is right and wrong. Follow His understanding, follow His leading, and when things don't make sense, follow Him anyways. There's a poem that I really like by, I think it's Minnie Haskins, back in one of the Great Wars. She wrote this poem, and a portion of it is this person saying, I need to go into the dark, give me a light. And it's saying, go and put your hand in the hand of God, for that is better than a known path. There's going to be times in our life where we go through uncertainty, through questionable times. Job is sitting on this pile of ash, and he has no idea where to go from here. Why did this happen? We'll talk about that later. Why did this happen? Why am I going through all this suffering? What do I do from here? What's next? Put your trust in God. In uncertainty and in certain times, put your trust in God. Recognize that He knows best. His ways are absolute. I hope that helps you. I hope that's an encouragement to you. Before our next video, try and sit down and read the book of Job. Come up with some questions, study it a little bit, and we'll talk a bit more about the book of Job next week.